Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to my channel. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is Daniel, but he goes by the name on his YouTube channel is Objective Ethics. And I'm delighted to have him here because him and I connected through comment sections, through other live chats. I just witnessed him debate. And he's a fellow agnostic, and he's pretty incisive on the scripture, and I'm very impressed by his wealth of knowledge. So, Daniel, thank you for coming on, and by all means, go ahead and introduce yourself further, and we can discuss, the debate that you had, the one that happened yesterday with Lance and Carrington, and the origins of agnosticism and atheism.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on, Tristan. We've talked a few times in the past, but we just kind of recently met, as you mentioned, and I will reciprocate. I've been very impressed with you as well. You were very well articulated. Your knowledge of the Bible is second to none, as far as I'm concerned. My understanding is you went to seminary, and I'm assuming you graduated from seminary. So I've been really impressed with you and also your attitude. I think you're extremely polite. You know, it's difficult when you're having conversations with people who come from different backgrounds and different belief systems, but I think that you navigate that very, very well. So it's an honor to be here and share time with you, brother. So as far as myself goes, essentially I'm a boat manufacturer by trade. So I have a couple patents for my innovative hull design. You see me riding this hybrid kayak in my picture right here. I'm licensed to build boats with the U.S. Coast Guard. So one of my specialties is debunking the Noah's flood myth from the position that the Ark was not a seaworthy vessel. So I really enjoy having those kind of discussions. But as far as theology goes, I did study religious studies in college, and it was not my major, but I did study that as well. And then I actually attended seminary for a short time, but because I've always been an agnostic, and so I refused to sign a statement of faith. And as you know, going to seminary, if you don't sign a statement of faith, the only thing you can do is you can audit classes. And a lot of seminaries won't even let you do that. But where I was out in Southern
Yeah.
California, they would let me audit classes, but it's like two
Oh.
to three times more expensive to do it that way. And
Oh.
after, a short time, I just realized this is just a waste of my money. I'm not going to get any degrees or credentials, or, you know what I mean? As much as I love to study history and stuff. So I have been
Yeah.
studying theology officially and unofficially for about 30 years now. So I feel I have an above average understanding of the Bible and Christian epistemology, but I'm certainly not an expert. And I'm sure, I could learn a lot from people like you, and I do every day. So appreciate you guys having me here. One of the things I did do when I was in college, though, was actually write a paper on the origins of atheism and agnosticism, and how those terms have the definitions have kind of evolved over the years and over the millennia, I would say. So I have a pretty good background on that particular subject, and I think it's an important subject for us to talk about, because the reason I even wanted to do this with somebody is because I'm online like you are all the time, and I'm seeing theists accuse atheists of hating God and all this is crazy stuff that you see it flying across the aisle. And I've seen atheisms make the claim that the only thing atheism is a lack of belief, and I just get the feeling that a lot of people don't really know what these terms really mean if you want to get down to the definitions and how they should really be applied. And so I thought it would be beneficial to the community in general to just kind of maybe clear up some of this stuff. And I want to be clear that we live in a day now where what do you call identities are very important to people. So when we start getting into the etymological meaning and history of words and things of this nature, it really kind of goes out the window when it comes to personal identity. And I do respect people's identity. However a person wants to identify, we should all respect that, frankly. But it does make it difficult to have a conversation with somebody if their identification doesn't match the known etymology or the dictionary definition of something. So if we get an understanding of the basis of what we're working with, then when a person adopts this identity, they can at least understand where their opposition is coming from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, very, very good. Well, what do you think about the debate that you just had? I mean, this is kind of pertinent to the one you just had. I remember you were bringing up a lot of good points. One of them that stuck with me was the whole dating of Genesis, and it's just amazing how the Christians don't even know, study, or see the significance of that late dating in that Second Temple Babylonian period. What's your comments on that?
Well, I was a couple of different things. First of all, I was really frustrated. I don't know if you caught this or not, but I had a discussion with the people. I think you're talking about the after debate show where I talked about the dating of Genesis, and
Yeah,
that came
it
up.
was at the
And
after. Oh, okay.
that was the after debate show. Yeah. And the frustration I have is that group of people, I was in a live stream and it was just me as the only skeptic. And it was like five or six different Christians coming at me, and they were trying to debate
Yeah.
the global flood. And it was an absolute
Yeah.
hot mess, as you can imagine, because for
Yeah.
one thing, the global flood has been thoroughly debunked by every single field of science, and so I've got these guys coming at me with essentially conspiracy theories about science and how the devil is in control of everything and all this stuff you just can't make arguments against at some point. Rationality goes completely out
Right.
the window. But they're
Right.
trying to base their arguments on scientific claims that are ultimately scientific that we've disproven. And every time I bring up the actual evidence or the scholarly consensus, they would hand wave it away as a conspiracy theory or the devil made them do it or something. And it's just, how do you deal with
Right.
these people? But one of the things they did, and they were really attacking me personally at throughout pretty much the whole thing. And one of the things they claimed is that I was asserting that Genesis just basically popped out of thin air in the Babylonian period, because I told them when the critical scholars, date that book to, and the whole Torah and everything comes from essentially the Babylonian during the exile, what I mean, the diaspora of the Jews. I'm sure you're well aware of that. And so that doesn't mean that scholars are not saying that there was no earlier tradition, no manuscripts, no oral tradition. There was no history behind this. They don't think it just popped up out of thin air, and that's not the claim. But that was the assertion that they were essentially saying that I was making, which is completely false. I think any person with half a brain knows that these things don't just pop out of thin air when it comes to something like this. These religions, they evolve over millennia. They reach way back into antiquity to pull traditions and things of this nature. And there's a clear history that we can see of where the Jews who were Israelites, who were Hebrews, who were Canaanites, we could see this whole thing throughout history of where this stuff comes from. We could look at the Mosaic Law, and we can trace back to like the Code of Hammurabi, for example. We can look at the
Yeah.
teachings of Jesus with pacifism. We can look at Eastern traditions like Buddhism that predate that. So we can Greek Stoicism and the Greek epics can be seen in particularly in Acts, in the book of Acts, but even a little bit in Luke. So we can see these influences. It's not to say these things just pop up out of thin air. And I absolutely agree with the critical scholars. I think that Matt Baker has put out an excellent book. It's called uh, Where the Bible Comes From, the history of the Bible, I think is what he titled that book. And he does a beautiful illustrations, and he's a practicing Jew. And he lays it out clearly, the timeline of Genesis coming in around, I want to say like around 560 something, or maybe 625 BCE,
Hmm.
somewhere in that period with, where you have the Babylonian exile before Persia sent the Jews back to Jerusalem. Clearly, this stuff was being written before that.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about the debate with Carrington and Lance? I know you wanted to chime in on that one.
Yeah, so the debate with Carrington and Lance I thought was very interesting. I feel that Lance actually won that pretty handily, and I'm not an expert when it comes to full preterism, to be honest with you. I've learned actually a lot from watching your videos, and your debate with Don Preston was very educational for me, and I thought very interesting. I thought you did a really good job in showing the dangers and the harm in that type of epistemology.
Yeah.
But as far as the debate we're talking about, I think that Lance won it by default based on the fact of some comments that I left in the chat, which is that Mr. Carrington, he just used so many logical fallacies in his argumentation. And if you cannot make an argument without using a logical fallacy, your argument cannot be considered as valid. Just point blank. No matter how good you think your argument is, if you've got to engage in logical fallacies, that argument should be rejected, in my opinion. And I think Lazarus, or Lance, whatever his name is, I think that he had a solid foundation for his position. It was well evidenced within the exegesis of the Bible itself. He had multiple citations. Mr. Carrington seemed absolutely hung up on Luke, refused to accept any other synoptic gospel. It just was really interesting how he was so dismissive of all the evidence that Lance was putting out there. He didn't address it at all. He just hand waved it away. And I just think that by default, like I said, because of those reasons, I thought Lazarus did a great job. The one thing I will say about that debate, though, and I think for everybody moving forward, if you watch the debate that I had before that, and we'll talk a little bit about that debate because I think it was very interesting. But if you look at the debate that I had, there was no crosstalk. We were extremely polite to each other. We were constantly, if we ever interrupt the other person, it was by accident, and we would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. Were you done talking, or did I answer your question effectively?" It's completely different than the debate that I saw between Lance and Carrington. And I know they were trying to be polite, and they avoided a lot of ad hominem to a certain degree, but there were still a lot of, you know what I mean, a lot of darts being
That's
thrown. And the
because
biggest
there
problem
was a
was,
tension buildup. That's a lot of times that happens because of the tension buildup. You know, like when you're debating
yeah,
somebody and you don't know who they are and there's no history between the two, then it's like you come in there, right? It's easier. But they were going back and forth on Facebook, so
oh,
as
okay.
yeah, so when there's that tension that's built up, and a lot of times they're arguing from things that were said in the past, that maybe the audience doesn't know, but I already anticipated them to get heated like that. I hear what you're saying 100%. I try to keep it as calm and collected as possible, but sometimes I don't know. I guess sometimes nature just doesn't take its course that way with certain styles. I don't know, but that you're right though. Your debate was very very good, very professional, and that's how it should be. It should be like that, but what can you say? Sometimes it's not that way because the way the nature of the discussion.
Well, I totally respect what you're saying, and I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I do appreciate you acknowledging that Ray and myself didn't engage in any of that. And you're right about
Yeah.
the history. There's a big difference. I'm involved in the martial arts quite a bit and stuff like that. So there's a big difference between if you engage in a self defense situation where there's no history, you just have an attacker coming out of the blue or whatever. There's no emotion. There's no time to build up any emotions to that. But if you're going to get into a fight with somebody in high school, and you guys are talking about it like
Yeah.
for a week, you're going to meet me here tomorrow at the whatever. There's a whole different ball game. It's just completely different set of circumstances, and it does have an absolute effect on the situation. But the
It
one thing
does.
I will say, though, and this is props to you, and I think this is something that those two gentlemen, and again, I'm not trying to throw shade on these guys. They're not even here to defend themselves. I really respect both of them. I think they're both polite people and both very intelligent, so I'm not here to throw shade on people, but I would say that they could both look at the debate you had with Mr. Preston, right? And look at how, even though you guys had what, 4 years building up to that debate, if I remember correctly from what you had said. I mean, I know a long time for sure. And
It
there
was
were
about four
certain,
years.
yeah, you could see the emotions, especially on your side, which I really resonated with your passion for why you were making your argument and when you showed the harm that can come from this. And I really, that emotion
Yeah,
came
well,
through
you
you.
see,
It was,
the thing
it
is,
was
well, the thing is with Don and I is that a lot of full preterists don't read Don's literature. That's the problem. Only those who have actually read his books, I'm talking about from front to cover, and actually watched his morning musing series, those are the ones that see the gravity of the arguments. But with Don and I, look, I'm happy for Don. Even like months before the debate, before he agreed, I told him, look, you're gonna have a good night, and I'm happy for him. I can't wait to see him debate again. I'm happy for how it all turned out, and
well, I think,
what can
yeah,
I
I
say?
think there was a stark difference though, because even though you guys had the emotion, just like we were talking about, you were both extremely professional compared to the debate I saw with the other two gentlemen. You know what I mean? Like you guys didn't talk over each other. You guys didn't engage in the ad hominem stuff. So that's what I'm saying. So even though you're right when you say that, yeah, that extra emotion, that buildup does affect things, it can affect things. You're right about that. But you provided a perfect example of how you can avoid all that and just stick to the debate itself. Because I
Yeah, I
didn't I
mean,
didn't see
yeah,
this
I
whole
get it.
debate, but I
I
don't think
know,
you
I
guys
know.
talked over each other.
Yeah, no, no, no. With yesterday, yeah, it did get a little like that. They were talking and all that and going over each other. I get all that. Sometimes that happens, but I get it. But hey, what can I say? There are people who look, whoever what side you're on, there are people who are on Carrington's side. They're gonna say, oh, he made his arguments. He made the best points. And then people on Lance's side, maybe there should be like an official. As a matter of fact, we got Jacob Kilburn here. He is a MMA fighter. He's inside the chat. Maybe we should revolutionize this debating thing, Daniel. Maybe we should have like a point system, a scoring point system. Like I don't
Well,
know, maybe
it's interesting.
yeah, like
No,
a
it's
vote.
interesting you say that because I was actually, so my first debate. Now I'm not a debater, and you can tell if you watch my debate that I was really nervous, and I'm not a professional debater. I'm really critical because I like to be hard on myself to really force myself to improve as much as possible. And I gave myself a pretty low grade for that debate, even though I feel I won it handily. And if you go look at the chat section, every single person in the comments right now is saying that I won that debate. And I don't think it's really a question. We'll talk about my debate. I guess we just go there right now. But an interesting thing about that is my first debate was on, there's a big channel called the Think Institute. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They do Christian
Oh yeah,
apologetics. And
I know,
yeah,
I
yeah,
know
they
the
love to
students. Yeah,
talk philosophy and stuff. So I went in there and they were having an open debate forum where you could just go in and they give you like 15 minutes or something like that to kind of go at it. And they had a famous Christian apologist who's been doing this for 30, 40 years named Matt Slick on there. And
I
I
know
was
Matt
watching.
Slick. Yeah, he
Okay,
debates
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah.
Trinity. He debates on the Trinity, right?
Well, this debate was more about there was all over the place because when the guest comes on, they bring in kind of their own topic. So it was kind
Oh,
of
okay.
jumping all over the place. But they do a lot of um, like kalam or cosmological, the ontological arguments and things of this nature. So there's a lot of philosophy. But
Yeah.
I was just watching it and I just couldn't believe how disrespectful everybody was being to each other. And so the very first time that I got on any live stream whatsoever was actually that night. And I debated Matt Slick. And my goal
Oh,
was to
cool.
show people that you could have a debate and not be disrespectful. That was really I wasn't even out to win a debate per se, right? And throughout that debate, first of all, they extended my time to like 40 minutes. It's supposed to be 15, but because it was such a polite conversation, they kept extending the time, which I didn't
Oh,
even ask them
nice.
to do. Yeah, and Matt Slick, I think if you go watch that, it's up on their channel. You can go watch that debate. And Matt Slick said, I think at least 3 times how polite and cordial I am. And after I left, he's like, "This is the type of person that we want to come back here." So just to
That's
show
cool.
that was the whole goal was just to show that you can do this without getting rude or disrespectful. But where this ties into what you were saying is somebody named Pro Debates who sits in on a lot of debates himself, he took the transcript from that debate and loaded it into ChatGPT, and ChatGTP judged the debate based off the transcript. So it's a completely impartial way of coming up with a winner. And according to ChatGTP, I got the third highest score of any debater with an 8 out of 10, and the highest score was a 9 out of 10. And then Matt Slick in my debate against him got a 4 out of 10. Like I crushed him,
Wow.
absolutely crushed him.
Wow.
And that was based on ChatGTP, not about any person with any agenda. And I'm not saying ChatGTP is the arbiter of truth, you know what I'm saying? But just based
No,
off of
I
the
get you.
structure of, yeah, yeah. So if you ever want to see how that worked out, you can go into that debate and look at the comment
Yeah, I'll
section
take a
because he,
look at. I'll take a look. As a matter of fact, ChatGPT and a few others said that Don won the debate. But the poll, as a matter of fact, on during the live stream, they voted that I did. But to me, I can't expect a robot to understand morals and ethics. You know, but at the end of the day, yeah, when it comes to debating, I mean, really, I'd rather have open live discussions. As a matter of fact, that's what I requested with Don, was to have an open freestyle live discussion and involve the community, and he kept refusing. He didn't want to do that, and I just thought, okay, I guess the debate it is. But you're right, like, and I commend you for that. Like your temperament and your disposition on having a debate, and yet, you know yeah, I commend that. And what can you say? Life is a journey, and I know that there are certain things that stick in debates. Some people, they don't like debates; they feel like they're not beneficial. I think they are beneficial, because there could be a moment in time, there could be just 60 seconds worth, or even 10 seconds of something that was said, or wasn't said, and that can change the perspective of somebody. So I'm a fan of debates. I'm a fan of that. I prefer open live discussions. I think that's more beneficial, because in a debate, then it becomes like, oh well, I only got like 20 minutes to make this point, and then you've had more time than me, and blah blah. Blah. Unfortunately, it can be like that. But
well, I agree
but
with
yeah,
you. No, I agree with you 100%. And I would say that my forte, if there is such a thing in this regard, would definitely be an open discussion. And I'm
yeah,
not a skilled debater. So if anybody is expecting me to go look at my debates and then see some great oracle debater, that's not my skill set whatsoever because I just haven't done it since high school. For one thing, I didn't even do it that much in high school. I understand the format, the opening statements, the cross examination, I get all of it, but I just prefer to do like you're saying, like have a discussion. However, I do agree with you 100% that there is actually, especially with the advent of the internet, where people can years later go back and review this stuff. You never know who's going to come across this content. And
yeah,
I do believe that you're right when you say that, and you're intelligent for pointing that out, that the benefit is really to the audience. I mean, we can both agree, I think, that of all the hundreds of debates that we've both probably watched throughout the course of our lifetimes, we have never, ever, ever seen the loser of a debate go, you know what, Bart Ehrman, you're right. There actually are contradictions in the gut. You know what I mean? Like we're just
yeah,
never going to
right,
hear somebody admit that they were wrong in a debate.
right,
It's that's not what it's for. It's for the audience, and it's to
yeah.
get
It's
the
for the
information.
audience, right? It's for the.
Yeah.
I look at it like it's for the future generations. It's for somebody 10 years from now, it's for somebody 1,000 years from now. That's how I kind of look at debates. But that's cool that you bring that up because you know, I mean, they're beneficial. They're beneficial. I know more and more people would like to see it, especially with like the big time scholars. Um, I would like to see it. Like more of like the big names debating more. Like if
So
it
give me
becomes like
your, just
more
real quick, if you could pick any debate whatsoever, any debate, what would you want it to be
like between two
between who?
people.
Yeah, any two people. I'll tell you mine real quick. I
Go
would
ahead.
want to see Richard Carrier and Bart Ehrman debate historicity of Jesus. I would kill this. I would pay money to see that one.
That's cool. That's cool. You know what? One of mine was Richard Carrier and Dawn, and I actually did sponsor and pay for that debate. That was one of them that I would have loved to see, and I saw it. And I paid for the debate, sponsored that because I'm a fan of it all. Um, Let me see. Let me think of one that I would like. I would like to see. Man, you know what? Like debate theology, debate science. I don't know, man. That's a good question. I mean, I would. I mean, I wish to God that Christopher Hitchens was still alive.
Oh
That would
yeah.
have been
Oh yeah.
phenomenal. That would have been phenomenal. I mean, you still have Dawkins. Um, maybe Harris, maybe Sam Harris. Maybe him matched up with like an evangelical or something like that. Um, I don't know, man. At this moment, I can't really think of any at this moment. You
Yeah,
know.
no, when you get it, I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that. I'm sorry, I just
No,
got,
no, no.
but yeah, no, when you mentioned Richard Dawkins, I actually consider myself to be extremely lucky to be living in a time with Richard Dawkins. And that man is such an absolute treasure to humanity and brilliant at the same time, in my opinion. Listening to him is just such a pleasure. I mean, there's not too many people I'd rather listen to talk about anything, frankly, than Richard Dawkins. He is such a gentle soul. I love that guy.
He was supposed to debate William Lane Craig. I think they talked about it, but he refused because of William Lane Craig's stance on kids dying in the Bible. It just absolutely amazes me how you can somehow explain that away. Even when I was a Christian, I knew that I couldn't explain that away. I would just have to pull the sovereignty card all the time. Say, well, hey, listen, God is sovereign, and there's just some things that we just have to accept. And that just gets tiring after a while, especially when you're talking to Muslims and they're saying the same thing, and you're talking to Mormons and they're saying the same thing, and you're talking to other denominations who disagree with you even within Christianity, they're saying the same thing. And so it's like, you get tired of using that faith card. You get tired of using that, well, God is sovereign, so even though you can't figure it out, it doesn't make sense, I'm still going to believe in it anyways. Which is another like proof positive that wow, this Bible is not actually personal. It's not actually written for us, and that's where full preterism came in and helped me see that. One of the major things I wish I could go back. I didn't touch on it, but I wish I could have went back when I was debating Don was the usage of the metaphoric language. It's simply mythical language. That's what all his metaphors that he puts on. I mean, what do you know? We debated on myth vision. That's what it leads to. People start saying, "Look, they're over there talking in metaphors, this allegories, that." We don't talk in metaphors today, especially if there's a prophetic crisis situation that's going to happen. Everyone's just coughing up metaphors when something is about to take place. It's like mythical language. But I mean, what can you say? I mean, theology is you're not going to have all the answers, and I feel like there's nothing new that's going to come up. I mean, we're talking about atheism and agnosticism now. It's like, what new religion or what new theological perspective is going to engender that's going to actually catch a wave? I'm waiting for that. I hope for right now we have everything. There's nothing new that's going to come up and it's going to start a whole cult and people are going to suffer and die for it or get hurt or lose out, like
Oh, I agree with you 100%. I think that's a great segue into my debate review that I had, because that's exactly what I hammered down on, as you know, watching that debate. It was a debate about morality, and I had basically, it was my debate to lose because I had all the advantages. For one thing, specifically for what you just said, all of the arguments that my opponent was going to bring to the table are 3,000 years old. There's not a single new argument that he could possibly bring to the situation that I didn't have a chance to study. You know what I mean? Because there's no new arguments to be made for it. And so I
Yeah.
had all that advantage. Whereas my concept of objective morality coming from a naturalistic standpoint, now this is not new, as I mentioned in the debate, in the after show. This goes back all the way to like Aristotelian philosophy, and then you saw how Christians like St. Thomas Aquinas kind of adopted this. And there's just so many. This has been around for a long time, but it's been propagated and promoted by the church so much, and when it gets tied to God as being this objective arbiter of morality, which I was able to fully debunk, by definitionalism, which I pointed out in my debate. One of the things that I did do was prove that God's morality and God's creeds and God's law is not objective, because definitionally that breaks down. It has to be subjective because it's based on God's mind and God's will. So it's not something that God just observed. It's actually God's will and determination, which makes it subjective. So to call God's morals objective is a complete fallacy. It's a logical fallacy you can't get around. And I was able to display that in the debate. And the other thing I was able to do in my debate was hammer down on what this moral code actually is and how immoral it really is. And we talked about, the killing of the Xing of the babies in the flood, and we talked about the essay against women, and even when Jesus talks about the stoning of children. I mean, all the way from the Old Testament to the New Testament, you can't get away from the atrocities and the atrocious nature of this religion. It's absolutely
Right.
disgusting, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
even Jesus on the cross, like, God couldn't have chosen a better way. He had to do blood atonement. Here you have this hanging corpse that's just on the cross. I mean, if that is not the symbol of a blood cult, I don't know what else. Um, studies have shown that children are frightened by this. They go into these Catholic churches, they see a dead man hanging, and that is the foundation of love and morals and ethics in the Christian worldview. Greater love has no man than this: a man lays down his life for a friend. And God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. So here you have a dying corpse, just shredded, an innocent man, by the way, pure and holy, without sin. And some, it's like an ugly, beautiful thing. That's like the whole story. It's just an ugly story, this terrible event. But yet it's beautiful in its fulfillment, I guess. But
Well,
yeah,
it's the way they spin the narrative, because you're right, it is a blood cult, and it's really interesting to me to see how people that buy into this, that believe this religion, they detach themselves from common sense and from reality
right.
whenever it gets uncomfortable for them. To, like you said, the righteousness of the flood and the righteousness of the stoning of children or whatever, and they just say, "Oh well, it's sovereignty, it's God's sovereignty. Who are we to question God?" And they just hand wave it away because they really don't have a way to effectively deal with it. The crucifixion. I mean, this religion, if you really read the Old Testament, and critical scholars agree with me that the Israelites were practicing child sacrifice. So they were criticizing the Canaanites for doing this, but it's actually, you look back and you see the Israelites were actually involved in that. And then Christians say, no, God, they would never do that. Some Christians will. But then you say, well, wait a minute, why did God tell Abraham to take Isaac up to the mountain? And wouldn't Abraham be like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, he never even batted an eyelash. I'm not saying that he was happy about it, but it never crossed his mind that this would never be something that could be conceived of as a sacrificing a child. And then you go all the way to the New Testament where Jesus is hung on a cross. I mean, you got blood sacrifice from start to
I
finish as far
know.
as the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
It's just a consistent theme.
I know. And then you have,
You
like,
miss
you have the mutilation of your genitals. Like, I remember Christopher Hitchens would bring this up all the time. I'm just thinking, like, damn, like, you know what, God, out of everything that you could have done, like, maybe get like a scar or some sort of like tattoo or something for like your covenant to show, like, hey, I'm an Israelite. You had to go down and start snipping away at the man's penis. You know what I'm saying? Like, little baby's born, this beautiful little creature. Now you just want to go right down its freaking genitalia and start, mutilating it, snipping it away. What was it about the penis that God was so fixated on? He could have
well,
done
there's
so
another
many other methods, and it's like, oh, we want to just snip away at the foreskin that he created. It's hilarious.
there's so many things about Paul's revolution to Judaism, as far as I'm concerned, but his success with the Gentiles, there's a lot of things you could point at. But as far as I'm concerned, probably the number one thing was saying, no, 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 you don't have to be circumcised. We're gonna get away. We're gonna do away with that thing. That had to be a huge seller right there, you know.
I know. I mean, you have babies that die. There's about 2,000, I want to say, 2,000 babies every year die of infection due to circumcision. Um, you know, I don't know. Maybe they weren't doing it the Jewish way. I don't know. But, there's just a lot of barbaric, ancient mindsets that just cannot fit in the 21st century. Most, like I was, like, like the Hebrew Israelites or people who say that they follow the Torah. Like, no, you don't, because you'd be locked up for life if you did. Even I would say that most Christians, yeah, they're trying to be like Christ, but there's loving your enemies, forgiving those, turning the cheek, and all that. I don't think that that's healthy for society. We wouldn't have a nation if we did that. We wouldn't have a defense department as a country. But if you say, oh well, the kingdom of God is different, um, there's just a lot of morals and ethics. One of them that I like to bring up, bro, is when Paul said that when a woman reaches the flower of her age in 1 Corinthians 7, that you can go ahead and have sex with her. He was talking about it's better to marry than to burn, right? And he goes, when the woman reaches the flower of her age, you can marry her. Every single historian and Bible scholar will say that the flower of her age was when?
About
About 12,
21, yeah.
12, 13
Yeah.
years old. And that's when they had sex with them. And so you do that today. You take that Bible passage, you take that Pauline ethic, those words that supposedly he penned down, came out of his mouth or it came from his mind, and that's inspired by the Holy Spirit. You try to bring that over today, you're going to get locked up for life. You're going to be considered a pedophile. You're going to be considered somebody who's egregious. But yet, Paul said, when a woman reaches the flower of her age, and they're going to say, "Oh, that's a culture thing," and that's exactly what the point is that culture, that Bible ethic, that Bible passage, that mindset back in those days cannot apply to us today. And that's just one example. It's like it's nuts. Well, there you go. You have one thing from Paul's ethics, especially when it comes to marriage, something that's very important in a human's life. So when he reaches the flower of her age, yeah. And it wasn't until the 1970s, I believe, is when they started instituting here in the West. You have to be 18 years of age, and that came from science because we knew that the prefrontal cortex wasn't developed yet until around that time. So, I think it's great that we pushed it up to 18 rather than 12 years old, but maybe some
Well,
Christians will
I
side
know
with Saul. I don't know.
I would piss off a lot of people right now by saying this, but as far as I'm concerned, from my understanding of science, is the frontal cortex doesn't actually finish developing until the early to mid 20s. So
Yeah,
it
there you
definitely at 18 it's significantly more developed than it is at 12. There's no doubt
go.
about that. But I'm
Yeah.
just to me it seems like the and maybe this is because the science has evolved so much since then that we have a better understanding with neuroscience and stuff like that. We have a better understanding of how that develops and stuff. But it does seem like 18 is a bit arbitrary because I'm of the mindset, and I don't have kids, so again, I'm just going to piss off a lot of other people when I say this, but I almost wonder if 21 wouldn't be a better age to actually consider a person to be an adult. You know what I mean? Like 18 even
I
seems
get
like there's
that.
a lot of maturity to be had and stuff. And I'm not trying to, like I said, to make people mad when I say that because like I don't have kids and I'm not I'm not trying to push this on anybody, but I just wonder, it's just a kind of something to think about. Is 18 even really old enough to make a lot of life decisions? Because there are things that people cannot do at 18 years old.
Right.
You can't drink alcohol, for example. There's a lot of things you can't do at 18. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's an
Well,
interesting. But I agree with you 100%.
yeah,
12 is definitely too. I mean, that's ridiculous.
I know. But hey, that's Pauline ethic, and it's because of the culture of that time, and that's exactly the point. That blood cult culture, that religious culture, that apocalyptic culture, that Bible culture, that Jesus culture. There's a whole freaking rock band called Jesus Culture making millions and millions of dollars off of that name. That Jesus culture cannot apply to us today. If there's some good teachings, that Jesus had taught and the apostles have taught, of course. It's like you could find goodness in all other religions, you know. But if you look at the totality of it, like one of the things that like Jesus saying to love me more than you love yourself, love me more than you love your mom, your dad, and that's why you have Abraham killing Isaac. It's terrible. Like that whole no, I am not going to do that. I think it's terrible. It's a betrayal of love. think of it, like people who put their faith in Christ, they never seen this man. It's kind of like, you say you're online dating, right? Like you're on your Hinge or whatever, you're on your Bumble, whatever, and you're like, hey, have you met this girl? Like, no, I haven't met her, but I'm gonna freaking give my whole life to her. I'm gonna give my money to her. We just met online. I hardly talk to her. It's all by faith. But I'm gonna love this figure that I never personally met more than my own mother, more than my own father, my children, my spouse, more than myself. I mean, it's what can I say? Only by faith, only by an indoctrination, I believe, can somebody truly believe this. And when you're born and raised in it, Daniel, and like you come from the West, and the Bible is like, part of your home, your mom and your dad believed it and all that. You have all this emotional investment. It is tough to detach. It can be tough,
I have no doubt. You said a few things I'd like to touch on before I forget, though. One of them, just really quickly, is while I do agree that there are a lot of people, Christians in particular, and even some other people who aren't studied in history that are atheists, would look at Christianity and say, well, if the Christian ethics, if you just practice that and got away from the supernatural stuff, I would be supportive of it. But my claim is that if you look throughout history, as I mentioned before, none of that stuff is original to Christianity or Judaism. That stuff is well developed in other cultures. So if we're going to
yeah,
actually support
yeah,
those ideas, and I think we should support those ideas, we should look at the source and see where they came
right,
from. This is why when I talk to Christians or anybody else, and I always try to tell people, look, I'm not trying to make people deconvert, but if a person needs religion and that's a huge part of their life, I in a conversation, a one-on-one conversation, I would recommend, hey, look into something like Buddhism or Sikhism or anything
yeah,
else, Taoism, or just deism or panpsychism, or anything that gets away from this harmful religion, because it is a harmful religion as far as I'm concerned. And we look at throughout, and I pointed this out in my debate, when you look throughout history of what people do in the name of this religion, and I think the other thing that you mentioned that I like to touch on is, you mentioned loving God more than your own family and stuff like that. But here's what I believe. I believe that it is actually the ultimate form of narcissism. It's the ultimate form of loving yourself, because what you're
mm,
really attached to is your own interpretation and your own subjective idea of what this God is and what this God is doing for you
mm,
specifically as an individual. And I think that's what's
right.
so hard for people to detach themselves from. And I'm not
Yeah,
trying to be mean to
that's a good
people.
way. Yeah, no, I get it.
You know what I mean? But I do really think it's not actually a love of God, because this God is not reciprocal. I don't care what people want to say. They can make whatever claims they want, but we all know this is happening inside the person's mind. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
inside their heart, they do believe this. And I understand that they believe this is happening, but it's happening
Yeah,
within them. It's not happening externally, because if it was, we'd have evidence for it. So
right.
everything is internal. And at that
Yeah,
point, you're talking
and
about self.
fears. Yeah, and fears another
Fear's
one.
a big
It's
one. Fear's a
internal.
big one. Sure, you raise
Right,
kids to believe they're going to burn in hell. That's a huge
right.
motivator. The whole,
Hmm.
I remember as a child when my mother, before shit hit the fan with my family and stuff like that. When I was a small child, my mother was Christian. She was very, very, very Orthodox Christian, like a lot of mothers were. And we had to go to church. And I remember as a small child going to Sunday school, and they were talking about Noah's Ark. And they just had these really cool coloring book type style pictures of all these happy little animals floating on this rickety little wooden boat. You know what I mean? And the sun shining and the doves flying, looking to get its olive branch and stuff. And
How
it's all
cute.
presented as God loving us because he wants to save us from sin. They don't talk about the fact that probably a million babies drowned in that situation. They don't go over any of that stuff with kids. They paint it as this beautiful loving scenario, and when you get to be an adult, by that time you've been indoctrinated into thinking that it's all flowers and rainbows and stuff like that. And it's just
Hmm.
not the reality of the situation whatsoever. It's completely the opposite of that. It's a grotesque,
Right.
immoral, and unethical thing that which is why a lot of religious groups are starting to insist on taking that stuff metaphorically instead of literally,
Yeah.
because they can't
Right.
get away from that.
They can't get away from it, right? I get it 100%. It's interesting to see what Christianity will evolve into 100 years from now. I believe there's going to be a drastic change. Just religion in itself 100 years from now. Who knows? But I like how you said, you're not trying to deconvert people. I'm not trying to deconvert people. I have students of mine that come from the same denomination I do. They ask me, and I tell them, I tell them the truth. But like, for example, and I used this before in the past, Daniel, like, let's say there's like an old lady, right? And she's really old, right? And let's say she's a neighbor, but she's really religious. I'm not going to tell her anything, because I know that if I, first and foremost, like, it'd be devastating by the time like she actually does deconvert. She's like, I gave my whole life over to this. It could be devastating, you know, especially when, you know, you're at your tail end of life, you know, which is why I
Oh, I
commend,
agree.
yeah, I commend those who are up in age, you know, who've no longer in their youth. I commend them so much when they do decide to deconvert and vocalize that. I do. You know, I have you know some people who've deconverted and they say, man, I wish I could have deconverted earlier in my youth, you know. And I commend them even more. Like they're heroes to me because that takes a lot, you know. And so like fear plays another one. Like, yeah, you know, I don't want to, it's just like the Pascal's wager, you know, I'd rather just, you know, believe anyways and just, you know, it's just better for me. And I get that 100%, you know. So I'm not trying to take away nobody's faith, but I also don't want people to squander their life away, you know, and miss out on some of their dreams and opportunities because of religion, you know. So, you know, it's interesting because, like I said, I gave my whole life over to this vocationally. You know what I mean? With my schooling too, I got to pay student loans on a theology degree, bro. So it's like, you know, it's you know, I don't want to say that the past was a waste, you know, because it wasn't. But if I could push a button and say, you know what, could I go back and just not have got involved in this theology business? I don't know. I don't know where life would be, but all I know right now is that the present right now is a gift, and right now matters. And that's what Christianity doesn't want you to believe. Right now, your life matters. Christianity wants you to say, oh, this life is just but a vapor. Store your treasures up in heaven. Like the only thing that's going to matter is what you do for Jesus. That's the only thing that has eternal value. You know, but this life is just like a dress rehearsal. You know, but if we were teaching you know, students and the future generations, like, no, we don't know what's going to happen when we die. This could be all that we have. We can just go back to non-existent. This can be all that we have. Then that makes what we have much more valuable, Daniel. It makes what we have now much more, you know, we can cherish it much more because it's all that we have. And when we die, you know, but anyways, we can go on a sidetrack,
No,
but
that's
let's get
exactly.
into,
No, you're absolutely
yeah,
right. This is exactly why Holbeck, back in the 18th century of the Common Era, he talked about religion as being a detriment to the advancement and improvement of society. And there
yeah,
are other, well-known people who have talked about this, philosophers and
yeah,
scholars and stuff, and they've pointed this out because the problem with it is, and I agree with everything you said about not wanting to shatter people's lives. I know there's a brother, and I think it's actually the gentleman who you mentioned was in the chat here. He said something, and if it wasn't him, it might be somebody else. So I don't want to put words in his mouth, but somebody when we were talking the night that Derek and Jacob joined us, which was a real treat, by the way. But at any rate, he said something like, "Without Christianity or without my beliefs, I'd rather just like go jump in the freeway or something like that, and basically end it
yeah,
all." You know what I mean? And that just broke my heart for the brother. It really did, because you could see that his whole world is built around this ideology. And if you try to talk to people about these things and explain anything that's just reasonable, like, hey, look, there was no such thing as a global flood, bro. That just didn't happen. You can look at it metaphorically if you want to, but there's just absolutely no way on this earth that there was a global flood. There's no rickety wooden boat surviving the heat problem, for one thing, or surviving mile high waves and all this other insanity. The problem of the weight, the cargo. I mean, I could get into debunking the art because that's what I do. I build boats. But I'm telling you, brother, on flat water with no storm, as soon as you start loading all the animals and the fresh water and the food and everything, the downward force is going to exceed the upward force. And that's what it means to capsize or to sink something. You know what I mean? Because in a liquid, the further down you go, the greater the upward pressure is, but you are fighting against gravity, right? So as the mass increases on the boat itself, right, then that gravity is having a stronger effect. And that effect of the mass will create a greater downward force than the upward force that the fluid is creating itself. And it will sink on flat water. That was not a seaworthy situation whatsoever. It's absolutely impossible. So, and then the heat problem, that thing would have been incinerated as soon as the Mariana Trench opened up. You know what I mean? They said, experts say that like 75 kilometers of sedimentary material would have instantly evaporated. Now, think about what it would
mm,
take to melt that much rock. I mean, one atomic bomb literally incinerated people and cast their shadows onto the wall in Hiroshima, right? One bomb. They say that
okay,
the amount of energy that would have been created from this rising up the waters from the depths would have been like 130,000 asteroids, about 25 meters in diameter, all crashing onto the Earth at the same time. It'd be like 10 to the 28th power joules of energy. everything would have been incinerated. You know what I mean? Like literally just poofed out of existence. So vaporized. So you try to explain this to people that are beholden to these literal interpretations. And it's the same thing as talking to somebody about flat Earth. You try to explain to somebody the Earth isn't flat and that the moon landing wasn't faked. You know what I mean? And they just can't. They just cannot wrap their head around the real world that we're all living in. It
Yeah,
just
yeah. You
becomes.
know, I was in Turkey one time, and I was talking to some Muslims, and they believe that like when Adam ate the fruit with Eve, that the fruit got stuck in his throat, and that's why there's Adam's apples in men.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so the look on their face when I asked them, I said, "But if the fruit got stuck in his throat, then he would choke and he would die if it got stuck. Like Eve would have to come and do the Heimlich maneuver." And they're looking at me, and, it's like, listen, if you have a piece of fruit that gets stuck in your throat, then how do you breathe? You would choke. So they must believe that it's somehow morphed and like mutated and I mean, this is
I
just
mean,
hilarious, right?
the fact that we breathe, the fact that we breathe and swallow out of the same tube is a perfect reason to deny intentional design. Right there,
Yeah,
you know what I
very
mean.
good.
This is
Yeah,
evolution. That's a perfect example of how evolution works. The fact that we're breathing and swallowing out of the same tube, and the swallowing could choke us to death,
yeah,
means that this was not an intentional design. This body was not, this universe was not made with us in mind. You know, all that stuff just falls apart when you actually apply even a modicum amount of logic to it. But when you start to apply the science, but this is what happens is people who are beholden to these beliefs, and the danger of it is that not only are they denying science and promoting things like flat earth, for example, or things that are, in my opinion, just as crazy as flat earth, but they're teaching their kids to do the same thing. And when you grow
yeah,
up distrusting science, and I'm not saying that we need to just buy wholesale everything a scientist tells us. That's not what science is
right,
trying
right,
to
right,
promote itself, you know. But when you
right,
start buying into conspiracy theories that the devil is controlling science somehow and that science is trying to take over the world from religion, and none of it makes any sense. There's no evidence of any of this stuff. It's never been, it's just so crazy, like all conspiracy theories, you know what I mean? It's so detached from reality.
yeah,
And the danger then becomes you have billions of people who are trying to vote against gay marriage. You have billions of people that are refusing to use pronouns that transgender people want to use because they feel that it's, you know, it's a frankly irreligious to do so. It comes down to their religion. It's not even about wanting to be in, you know, definitions and the real world and stuff. No, they're promoting their religious ideologies here. What harm is it if I call somebody brother or sister? What does it even matter if they're a man or a woman? You know what I mean? A biological man or woman. There's no harm in that, but it's actually very, very um, beneficial to society for me to be polite and respectful to people. You know, I don't care if you want to identify as whatever you want to identify, and I'm not trying to minimalize their identities here. I'm just saying that literally, like, we should respect other people. There's no harm in that. You know, now we can have
yeah.
conversations about sports and about bathrooms and prisons and stuff, and those are all separate issues that we need to talk about. But as far as the very basics of humanity and how we deal with each other, you know, we just have to be a lot more humanistic, in my opinion, a lot more
I
humanitarian in our
agree.
efforts.
I agree, and that's what I hope. Happens in the 21st century. You know what I mean? Hence, that's why I entitled this channel "21st Century Mind." You know what I mean? I'm hoping that humanity, reaches an achievement, reaches a milestone. And I hope that we get to live to see it. And of course, hopefully one day wars will stop. Hopefully one day humanity, children could open up their history books and say, really, humans went to war? Like, yeah, they actually went to war and they were fighting. What for? Oh, because of religious beliefs, or something like that. Which the majority of wars has something to do with religion, especially even
Oh
if
yeah.
it's including politics. So it's like, you know, what can I say? But look, we're the topic of today was the origin of atheism and agnosticism. We're already about 50 minutes in, but let's get to this. I know that you're not an atheist. I'm not an atheist. I live my life like 90%. Like maybe I'm atheist in a sense. Like I don't believe that you know um, I should live my life. I'm more of an anti-theist, perhaps. That maybe none of these religious dogmas can apply to this simulator, or there's a creator out there. But what can you say? I hang my hat on agnosticism because it just means that you don't know. That's all, that you're not for sure. So you're a skeptic, you're an agnostic on these things. and you just don't want to take one position, So I have no problem being an agnostic, because to me that's just the safest bet. You know what I mean? That to me, So I haven't taken that leap yet of into atheism. But anyways, go ahead. Have the floor. The origins of
Yeah, no, I
atheism and
think you touched on
agnosticism.
some. Yeah, you touched on some really important things right there, and I think that's really what I want to get into because, and again, I want to repeat what I said before, just as a preface that at the end of the day, people can identify however they want, atheist, agnostic, theist, whatever. It's however you want to identify. But if you want to have a productive conversation with somebody, you need to find out where they're at. So if a person says they're a theist, and you start railing them about Jesus Christ being God and stuff, and it turns out they're a
Yeah,
Muslim, you know what I mean? It makes no
yeah,
sense. Like they have no idea what you're even talking about because they don't believe Jesus is a God. So you really need to find out, and it all falls under theism. So you got to find out what kind of a theist they actually are. And the same
right.
thing works for an atheist. Now, I would argue, by definition, that agnosticism goes back to at least the 6th century before the Common Era. And it is the same now as it was then. It really hasn't gone through much change. The only change it's going through is more recently when people are starting to adopt things like agnostic atheist or agnostic deist or agnostic theist even. And that really is a stretch from what agnosticism actually is, because by definition, when it started in the ancient Greece, and it means a is without, right? And Gnostic is basically a derivative of gnosis, which is knowledge. So it's saying without knowledge, right? And atheists are without knowledge, technically. And people try to separate knowledge and belief, but Gnosticism covers both because it is a belief at the end of the day, because you don't really know. Nobody knows anything, frankly. So the belief that nothing is known nor can be known about any gods or supernatural phenomenon. That's the key right there to agnosticism, because it's neither a belief or rejection, neither belief nor disbelief. It's, which is where you're coming from. But there's another step to that that seems to be missing, where it's the belief that nothing can be known. And that's true agnosticism. So I am a true agnostic in the sense that I don't think if there was a supernatural being that exists outside time and space, it's possible for us to know about that. It's just not. It's the same way that when people who doubt, the eternity of the universe or the validity of the Big Bang, and they say, well, what happened before the Big Bang? That's a nonsensical statement, because the Big Bang is where we understand time as we know it right now. So there can't be a before time. So it doesn't even make sense, right? It's because we can't look before the Big Bang. We have no way to measure anything or test anything before a certain point. Same thing with agnosticism. We don't have any way to measure or test this God hypothesis, so we can't know. And that's the bare bones of agnosticism. And you can go back to the 6th century to people like Protagoras, who expressed agnosticism about the existence of gods. You could look at Bella who was from India in the 6th century as well, who expressed agnosticism about the afterlife and other supernatural phenomenon. So we have evidence of this being what agnosticism was. It was a term that was referred to people who just said it's not possible to know. When it comes to
Yeah,
atheism, this also dates back very, very far into antiquity, but it has changed so much over the millennia, and it gets misused so much because atheism is this massive umbrella word that encompasses so many different thoughts and ideas. You can have a soft atheist, you can have a hard atheist. People claim to be agnostic atheists, you have humanist atheists, people who claim to be Satanists. There's different kinds of Satanists, both fall under atheism. Some Satanists just do it to piss off Christians. Other Satanists actually believe in Satan. You know what I mean? So there's just so
yeah,
much to this that if you're going to have a productive conversation with an atheist, you got to find out, what do you mean when you say atheism? Because people like Aaron Ra, who's very prominent in the atheist community, and so many others that are online, Matt Dillahunty and other guys I can think of, I have literally heard them say all atheism is a lack of belief. And that is simply not
right,
true. That is
right.
simply not true. And I'm not trying to throw shade on these people when they're not here to defend themselves, but this misinformation is what's leading to Christians accusing atheists of things that they may not be. It may not be fair to say an atheist hates God or an atheist doesn't believe in God or actually actively rejects God, and it may not
So you're
apply to
mad
that
at
particular.
God, right? Like you have a
Yeah, and it
vendetta,
may not
mad at
it
God.
might apply to some atheists, but it may not. It's not something that applies across the board to atheism. So
Yeah,
just
no,
as a quick look into the history of it, atheism comes from a, which is without, and theos, which is theism, right? And actually
yeah,
theos, which is God. So without God, and was originally used in ancient Greek to describe what we would refer to today as hard atheists, people who actively reject the idea of God, who claim there is no God. That was really the origin of atheism. However, the term atheism, as we use it in English, comes from the French Athiesm, which is one who also denies the existence of God or gods. So and that was in like the 17th or 18th century. Or 16th century. So this has been the idea behind atheism as we know it for a very long time. But there are various scholars and philosophers who go back into ancient Greece, like Epicurus, for example.
Oh yeah.
Diagoras is another one. You've got Confucianism. There's all these different types of people. Some of them, like a Diagoras, was a hard atheist. He absolutely spoke out against the idea of the existence of God. He was convinced, he was convicted of impiety and was banished from Athens for it. Epicurus was more of a deist, not an atheist, but he had this kind of a soft atheism kind of concept. Confucianism also was more of a deistic kind of a concept. He
Yeah.
believed in what he called Tian, which was something akin to heaven and an afterlife.
Mm.
So you get into the more modern time, the 16th and 18th century, and you get into this ideas put out by people like Christopher Marlowe or Knudsen or Holbach, for example, even David Hume, and people who changed these different ideas of what atheism is, and they started writing papers and putting out papers and things of this nature, writing books on this kind of stuff, where they were saying, well, there's more of this soft atheism type of concept. I don't say there is no God. I'm not making a positive claim. I'm simply not convinced. And then you have others that were anti-theists who were
Yeah.
maybe saying, well, I'm not going to make a positive claim, but I am going to say that I reject this notion of God, or I reject the idea of religion or something of this nature. So
Yeah.
you can see these changes happening.
Yeah.
Freud argued against the concepts of God and religion. He said they're just human inventions. That was Sigmund Freud said that.
Right.
Even looking at Karl Marx. Now, I'm certainly not a Marxist. I want to make that very clear.
All
But he
right.
taught that religion was an institution created by those in power in order to control the masses. And that rings true with what Voltaire said. Voltaire is famously known for saying in 1769, if no God exists, then it would be necessary for man to invent one, because he believed that belief in God was essential for maintaining social order, even if
Mm.
God's literal existence is doubtful. So, and then you can look even into the modern era in the 21st century. Richard Dawkins himself, the great Richard Dawkins, I will say, he wrote in one of his books, he's got what he calls the 7-point scale, atheism to theism. He starts at number one, where you've got strong theist, someone who knows God exists. You got number two is the de facto theist, someone who doesn't claim to know but strongly believes. And you've got the weak theist, what we call soft theism, who claims to know, or who doesn't claim to know but is inclined to believe. And in the very middle sits agnosticism, which is
Mm.
the probable stance, where you're literally 50-50, right? Then it goes into atheism in the reverse order. You've got weak atheism, which we would call soft atheism, doesn't know but is inclined to be skeptical. The de facto atheist doesn't know but is strongly doubtful. And then the strong atheist, who literally rejects the idea of God. He knows there's no God. And so even in the 21st century, we can see how there's this kind of this scale, this sliding scale. So when people are using terms agnostic, atheist, I question them. I say, well, what are you agnostic about? Because agnosticism doesn't think you can know anything about God. So what, if is that your stance, or do you think it's possible to know? Because maybe you're a soft atheist or an anti-theist or something of this nature. You know what I mean? Kind of get people
Yeah.
to think about those kind of things. And I just want
No.
to
Yeah.
just real quickly go through that, because I think that that's a pretty real basic understanding that people can take themselves. They can look into some of those names that I mentioned and really break it down and see what their arguments are for it. But they can see ultimately how this evolves and changes, and they can think about the way that they're using the etymology and the way that they're using the word, and
Right.
how is that being applied to their arguments.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that's very good. I mean, most people don't even get too deep into that. You know what I mean? But there's nuances in these terms, and those nuances matter. But I mean, what can I say? People want to, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, somehow that discredits you from knowing the Bible and knowing how to comprehend it, or, I've, if you look up what reading level the Bible is, the seventh grade reading level, It's a high school reading level at best. It's not very difficult to understand the narrative of the Bible, these stories that we, tell children, bedtime stories. It's not very difficult to understand this. And the fact that if someone's a skeptic or an atheist or agnostic, somehow like they're satanic, their cognitive faculties cannot comprehend the reading of the New Testament, Satan's in their mind, or they're carnally minded, or one I always got a lot was, oh, you're relying too much on intellect and reason. You have to, just start following after the spirit and faith when you're reading the Bible. I mean, it's terrible, but what can I say? These are the type of challenges that agnostics, skeptics, atheists, those who are actually, talking about theology, that's the like one of the number one comebacks. So why are you even talking about it? They want to question your motives. Um, why is this so important to you? Why are you trying to destroy people's faith? Another one, it's amazing. But what can I say? Well, let me ask you, what are let's say if religion no longer exists in society, what would be the ideology? I mean, are we aiming towards a one world government? I mean, let's say we get religion all out of the way. So I know this may seem impossible, but let's say there's no Islam, there's no Christianity, there's no Buddhism, there's nothing. Let's just say, I'm not trying to say that's what we would want, but let's just say if that was the case, what would humanity follow then? Would it be then safe for us to have like a one world government, or maybe we could still be divided? But how would those divisions happen if religion is out of the way? So now
Yeah,
the dividing factor is now removed between Jews and Muslims. Arabs and Jews. You take out the religion, now they're in one. So like if we remove all religious faiths and dogmas, then does that lead towards one world government? Does it lead to, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, Tristan. And something I've actually thought about, but I think there's a couple of different things to consider before we give it its appropriate answer. Is when we're talking about removing all organized religions, are we going to offer a replacement for the people who, because as a species and as an animal species, which is what we are, we're highly evolved animals, right? We have something in our brains that's called the HADD. It's the hyperactive agency detection device. Okay, so as a species of animals, we are actually prone because of, and this is located in the central cortex of the brain. So neuroscience has actually studied this. This is a scientific, I'd say, fact essentially, but it's, this is not just philosophy we're talking about. We're talking about the science behind this, right?
Sure.
And we have this innate need to ascribe agency to things, and that has been extremely beneficial to our survival and propagation as a species, because it goes back to the rustling in the bushes analogy, right? If we hear rustling in the bushes and we just assume that it's a god or the wind, when in
Yeah.
fact it's a tiger or a lion, we're going to be in big trouble, right? But if we
Right.
decide, you know what, maybe that's a dangerous animal that's actually causing that rustling in the bushes, and we should be prepared. Let's get our pointy sticks out and let's, sit around the fire or whatever. This is how we evolved over 300,000 years, by actually finding out what that rustling in the bushes was. And so we need this as a species, at least it seems like. So we need this, we have to ascribe some agency to things. So if we're getting rid of all these religious concepts, right, these organized religions, which I'm not opposed to, we have to replace it with something, frankly. We can't just, because it would be vacuous at that point,
Yeah.
just based on how prevalent it's been, right? And so the two things that we replace it with, which is the thing that I debated for in my debate the other night, which is the natural law of morality. If we understand that objective morality is a natural law and is not just something that's subjectively put into society by people, but there actually is a governing law that tells us Xing babies in global floods is immoral every time, no matter what. You cannot whitewash this over, right? It's always going to be
Yeah.
immoral. It's not because subjectively I can look at that and determine that it's immoral. It's because objectively it's immoral. So if we
Yeah.
start to embrace this natural law of morality, which I believe we should, because I do believe there is a law that ultimately determines what is moral and what is immoral, as I laid out in my debate, then
Yeah.
I think we have a replacement for just haphazard people determining what is right and wrong. Now, the reality is that every single thing that we do is going to be subjective. We cannot avoid that because everything we approach is through the lens of our own mind, right? So even when people say falsely that God's law is objective, and I was able to disprove that in my debate effectively, what is true is the same thing as what I'm talking about with the natural law of morality. Ultimately, it's going to rely on human beings subjectively getting together and making decisions about what we observe in nature, right? So there is going to be subjectivity to it. You cannot avoid it because at the end of the day, it's reliant on our own actions and interpretations. However, if we align our actions and interpretations with what is the objective truth, we will be far more successful. The other thing I would say is that when it comes to this one world government, what we see as a problem with atheism and the atheist community, in my opinion. So I am what's called an independent centrist politically. I do not align with the left or the right. As far as I'm concerned, they're both batshit crazy. They're way
Okay.
too extreme. And I
Hmm.
know that's going to piss people off, but I just cannot align myself with extreme ideas. You have to be able to compromise with people. You've got to be able to step out of your own paradigm as much as possible and at least consider what they're saying, right? But you
Yeah.
don't get that in American politics. It is so divisive. And in America, what's very interesting is I did some research into this, and at one point, and I think they said that over 85% of atheists are Democrats, right? And you
Mm.
have a large portion of conservatives are Christians. And so you have this mentality that seems to pair with particular political ideologies. And so getting rid of these religions isn't going to solve that divisive political problem that we are experiencing. And then there's that happens on the global scale as well, right? So we have to come to a real solution for humanity, and it's going to ultimately be a political answer and not a theological answer, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like how you said that we have to replace something, and that's very important, because it's kind of like, well, where do you go from here? You know what I mean? Like, I get that, and yeah, it'd have to be something political. I mean, gosh, man, I wonder what the world is going to be like 1,000 years from now. I know it's going to be drastically different. Maybe we'll unlock the keys to immortality. I don't know, but these are very important questions. And I remember when Christopher Hitchens brought up, he had stated, look, we didn't come from religion. Religion came from us. Um, religion didn't make our morals and ethics. It came from us. Morals and ethics came from us. Religion, we're the ones who invented religion. Religion in itself is not the causation of humanity. And so when I remember looking at that, that's so true because, most Christians, if you ask a Christian, is religion man-made? They're going to get stuck because then they're gonna, they because they have to believe that all the other religions are man-made, like Greek mythology. They have no problem saying, oh yeah, that's carnal flesh, that's the reprobate mind that made up those religions, or demon, Buddhism, all the other false doctrines of demons. So it's like, I just feel like being intellectually honest, and fair, and trying to be unbiased. I know you talked about being subjective. I understand your arguments 100%, and I'm trying to do my best to not have bias. Some will say, no, that's impossible. You're always going to have bias. Okay, well, I want to make it as possible as humanly possible, to not have a bias when trying to interpret, these philosophical investigations, and trying to take an analytical approach by observing all the other literatures, not just biblical literature, Christian literature, religious literature, but looking at the coherent options that we have. And that is within, scholasticism and academia. That would include philosophy, it would include science, it would include, all other worldviews. And I mean, what can I say? These topics are important, and I don't know, will we ever get answers? I don't know. I think your view of agnosticism, Daniel, is very, very commendable, because I don't think we'll ever know unless that deity or whatever it is that's out there, or they, whatever, it reveals itself, and it's like, wow, there it is, everyone, we're looking up at the sky, just like we could see the sun, just like we could see the moon. Look, there's the God, or there's the, and it's talking to us. That's like the only thing that, and even then I'll be like, am I hallucinating? I don't know.
Well,
You
that's
know?
exactly that. That's where the argument of intelligibility comes in, because there's been a tremendous amount of philosophy on both sides of that fence, where some people say it's impossible to know anything, and this is actually where hard solipsism came from, which is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
most difficult and the one unsolved philosophical argument that's been made today. Are we just brains in a vat? Are we living in the
yeah,
matrix? I mean, that's, you cannot solve it, and it's unsolvable for that very reason. And that's why I think agnosticism, frankly, is the only reasonable position to hold. And it's not because I'm an agnostic I want to say that. It's that
right.
I align myself with agnosticism because it's the only thing that I think is true.
Yeah,
We really
I
can't
agree.
know one way or the other when it comes to certain things. But there is a philosophical approach that says, yes, our senses are valid, right? Our senses are reliable to a
Right.
certain degree. We can't, we use our senses to actually function in the real world. So there's something to be said for both sides of that argument. But that's the first question that comes to my mind. If this God does reveal itself, how is somebody going to know that's because people are saying that's happening all the time. It's called
Yeah.
personal experiences and
Yeah, it would
revelation,
have to be
right?
like everybody can see it. And like, you turn on the news and there's the president of the United States talking about it, and there's
Well,
the prime minister, you know what I
Tristan,
mean?
what it'd have to be, brother? It would have to be the very thing that religious people say is already happening, but it clearly hasn't happened. It would have to be written on our hearts, every heart across, you know what I mean? Written in our minds. So we would just
Yeah.
know. We
And
wouldn't be able to question.
yeah, I would like to communicate. Who wouldn't want to communicate with, would we be afraid? I mean, I don't know. But I'm telling you, man, this whole existence of evil, that's the one that really, it holds me up a lot. I can see where somebody can become an atheist when I look and I see, like kids born suffering and all that. I go, man, this is terrible. I could see where somebody would want to rebel against that mind, you know. And even if there is a God out there, that's the number one question. If I could have one question, why are you allowing children to suffer? Why are you allowing babies to be born suffering? Why that? If you had any power, if you had any type of virtue or morals, that's the
Well,
number
this
one
is
question I would ask them.
no, you're absolutely right, and that is the number one question, which is why I mentioned earlier Epicurus, right? He lived 341 to 270 BCE, and he said that although gods exist, they have no involvement in human affairs, and was the first to argue about the problem of evil. That was literally, he's the first one that we know of, and that was over, over 2,000 years
Yeah,
ago.
years ago,
He
yeah.
brought up that problem because that is the number one argument, and that was essentially, I referenced the problem of evil not as an argument against God, and neither was Epicurus, because he actually was a deist, right? But his argument was against a personal God, and my
Yeah, a
argument against
personal
the
one.
Abrahamic God, the biblical God, is that same problem of evil. This is not mapping on to what we call good.
Yeah.
This is
Well,
not mapping on to what we
if
call
I could touch
moral.
on this, if I could touch on this, I've had several people, message me after my debate with Don, and I remember going back, and I remember Don was learning something from me, laughing when I was bringing it up, and he knew, but his view of intelligent design is actually pretty laughable. Like I asked Don, I said, okay, so, and I'm assuming the conservative view of Adam and Eve. They didn't know good or evil, right? Like I'm assuming the way he views Adam and Eve, like they were literal people. They were literally naked. They were literally talking to a serpent, right? That's how he believes it. That's how most Christians
Right,
believe it.
right.
So I get on their level, but I like to be a step or two just ahead. But I always get on their level, and so he believed, and I'm going to make a clip on this, a little highlight clip, that Adam could have done other sins other than eating the tree of forbidden fruit. So he said that Adam had the free will, moral agency. Now he never dived into these waters, but I have. I've studied this for years. Most scholars are going to say, no, Adam was innocent. He didn't know good or evil, and he was deceived to eat the fruit. So it was that whole concept, well, they were deceived, plays an important part. So he was deceived by Eve, and Eve was deceived by the serpent. But the question is, Daniel, is let's say if in his pre-fallen state, right, his state of innocence, right, he's naked, he hasn't sinned, right? Could he have, in his free will moral agency, and he didn't know evil, could he have said, hey, Eve, come over here, smacked her, and then grabbed her by the hair, and then kneed her,
Yeah.
and then just decapitated her? Could he have done that?
No,
And
I
the
would say
answer to
absolutely not. Absolutely, there's
no,
no
he
way,
couldn't have,
because if
right?
you
But
really study
God,
if you really study the text, there's two trees. You've got the tree of life, right? And you've got the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. So until you partake of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, there is no understanding, there's no basis to be able to
Right,
make a decision
exactly,
on the fruit of
exactly.
evil.
And
The whole thing
Don
of
has said, right. Well, Don had said that he could have, and he never delved into these waters. And most full preterists, they, like I said, man, it's terrible because when Adam ate the fruit, what was the consequence of that? Well, according to the Christian worldview, that's what warped the minds of humanity. That what now they know evil, and so then it was passed on, and that's why Cain killed his brother Abel. So according to the full preterists, they say that nothing physically happened. It was just when they ate the fruit, there was a covenantal death in the invisible realm, like a contract that died. But what's the physical consequence of that? And Don was laughing at this when I said, well, according to Don's view of intelligent design, murder, rape, suicide, bestiality, homosexuality, all of that would have engendered in the human race, even if Adam didn't eat the fruit, like because there was no physical
right,
consequence according to Don,
right.
and therefore hurricanes that kill millions, tsunamis, well, that would have happened in Adam and Eve's day in paradise anyways, because in his view, the only thing that happened was that when they ate the fruit, there was a covenantal violation, there was a covenantal contract, and it had zero consequence, nothing in the physical world. So then you're
So
like,
did
that's
you have a chance to ask him? And I don't know if you did or not, but did you have a chance to ask him? So a lot of Christians, full preterists or not, who believe in this doctrine of the fall of man, right, will make this ridiculous claim that, in fact, this is part of the hydroplate theory that I just hear, and it just makes me laugh. That there were no carnivores before the fall, so all the lions and all the Tyrannosaurus rexes and stuff were eating vegetables. Is that
yeah.
so? Were they eating vegetables before the fall, or were they? You know what I mean? Like, were there carnivorous animals before Adam ate this fruit? I mean, is he only thinking about this from the human exceptionalism standpoint, and how does he deal with the animals and stuff? Like
Yeah,
were they
that's one of
vegetarians
them. Yeah.
beforehand or not?
That's one of them too. Animal suffering. His name is Andrew Litzy, I believe. He's one of the leading theologians. I was studying this for like 10 years ago. Like, why are animals suffering? Because it doesn't state anywhere in the Bible. And after Adam ate the fruit, now animals began to stop being vegetarian and they started eating each other. You know what I'm saying? Just like that whole system of why the hell am I looking at a freaking Komodo dragon eat a freaking like Bambi or something like that.
For
Why
yeah,
am I
yeah.
watching this on National Geographic? This is terrible. This is intelligent design. And so the Christian says, well, the reason why it's all like that is because Adam made a piece of fruit a long time ago and it cursed everything. You see, it's like that's just the most
So wild.
nonsensical thing, right? But the full preterists say that's going to happen for all eternity. And so you go, okay, so what about if Adam didn't eat the fruit? And let's say they didn't sin, would the world still be the way it is now? Yes. This is why you see full preterists, they don't even know, they don't even delve into this. Don has not even delved into it. He didn't even know the gravity of what he was saying. And I was laughing at him because, and I'm thinking, okay, so not only are you going against the Greek, you're not only you going against Christianity, not only are you going, but now you're going to go against freaking creationism. Now you're going to go against intelligent design. And he has to concede, and he did in the debate. And he conceded that yeah, Adam had the free moral agency to do something besides eat the fruit, which means if Adam wanted to go have sex with an animal, bam, he could have had sex with an animal, and it would not have broken covenant, by the way. So that means Adam could have had sex with an animal. He could have molested Cain and Abel. He could have murdered his wife Eve, and he still would have been in covenant with God, because the only thing that would have broken covenant was don't eat the fruit. So can you
Well,
imagine?
that
Can you
matches.
imagine how stupid that
That
sounds?
matches. This matches, and this is one of the, as you are well aware, and I'm sure a lot of Christians have had to deal with this criticism of that particular epistemology, and the whole theology of it is because someone like myself and many others would say, "Listen, I'd rather be in hell with my really generous, kind neighbor who wasn't a believer than be up in heaven with Jeffrey Dahmer and all the other axe murderers
Yeah,
who
I get
decided to
it.
convert to, you know what I mean, to convert to Christianity at some point." And they have no answer for that. Their answer is God is good; He'll forgive you of anything. And the response to that is exactly that's the problem.
I know, man, and it's terrible. And this is why, dude, in the debate with Don, you know, uh, you know about the dancing in the streets thing.
Yeah,
He's
I've heard you talk about it. Yeah, yeah, you
yeah. I got
articulated that very well.
well, listen. That's the only reason why I even landed that debate was because I got him to say something so ridiculous that literally no human being has ever uttered, ever, as far as we know, in
Well, you knew
history.
how I knew how ridiculous that was even before I really heard you talking about it, because when you talked about the fact, which is very telling in my opinion, you talked about, and I'm not trying to spread gossip or whatever, but as far as I'm concerned, this is what I heard. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seemed to me like you said that in the pre-debate room when you and Don and Derek were together, he specifically said he did not want that brought up.
That's
Is
correct.
that like,
That's correct. What
and
in
that, and
yeah, that's
he
correct. Well,
knew
what happened was
he knew that
he
was going
knew
to be the silver bullet right there.
well, yeah, and I've already, yeah, of course, because look, I even have it. I don't know if you can see it, but I even had it
I can't read it.
dancing
What
in,
is it?
dancing in the streets in AD 70. I got it tatted on my leg. Now, yeah, he had requested that that's not relevant. But that right there, that comment, dancing in the streets, he said that in his debate with Richard Carrier when I asked how did the say it was the very first super chat question because I sponsored the debate, so I got
Now,
to
was that on
ask.
your channel?
No, that was on Myth Vision. This was the biggest debate of
Oh,
his life.
okay.
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 So the question is how did the saints experience the change in mortality, the meeting with Christ in the air? And did they fall into a trance? Did they have goosebumps? Did they shake? I mean, when they entered into that new covenant, right? When they had that spiritual transformation, this is how they describe it. They describe it as a spiritual resurrection that involves their spirit man. Well, then there has to be some sort of reaction to that, right? Like anything that if you're a dualist, you believe a soul exists, then there has to be a reaction to that, right? Just like when they first received the Holy Spirit, there was a reaction, right? Spoke in tongues, they prophesied, their whole life changed. Well, there's a next level to that. But anyways, he knew what the questions were months before, and he had stated, he said, "I'm real sure that there was some dancing in the houses, and they were crying tears of joy." And then and he had stated he compared it to World War II, when in New York City they were all kissing each other, and he said, "Oh, that's what was happening all around the world." So instead of a rapture, Daniel, instead of people being caught up to literally meet Christ and either to bring him back down to the earth or to disappear from the earth, if that's incorrect, then what are we substituting this with? And he had said that, yeah, all the Christians all around the world were dancing. When were they dancing? Oh, during 70 AD. And what was the causation of their dancing? Oh, because they heard about the destruction of the temple. They heard about their vindication. They heard about the Roman soldiers besieging Jerusalem. That's the return of Christ, according to the full preterist. The return of Christ is not a man, it's the Roman soldiers besieging Jerusalem. The
Right.
resurrection is not bodies coming up or meeting Christ, it's the Roman soldiers besieging Jerusalem. And he had stated that they were all dancing in the streets and that he was real sure
Then what? Then
that
what
it
is his
had to be.
response for like? What is his response for things like the Bar Kokhba revolt and things of this
Oh,
nature
yeah,
that were subsequent?
bro, he's been getting hit with that all the time. Okay, he's
Yeah.
been getting hit with that all the time, and it's the faith card. But I'm glad you brought that up because, there's a moral issue with that. You know what I mean? Like here, let's say somebody brought it up, and it's true. There's supposed to be like a rejoicing, right? Like when you meet Christ, if you get raptured and you meet him and you see him and you're in his presence, that is why you're rejoicing, right? But people have always asked, well, are you going to feel bad for those who get left behind in the rapture? Are you going to feel bad about your family and your friends who get left behind? Or if you're in heaven, are you going to feel bad for your loved ones that are in hell? Like these are questions that have been brought up in theology for a long, long, long time. And so what happens is that if in 70 AD, if they were not raptured and they remained here in the physical world, then normative human morals and normative human ethics would apply to them. So why would they be rejoicing and dancing when the only thing that they could see and process is the Roman soldiers besieging Jerusalem? You see, the only way to get out of that is to add Christ in the mix. The only way to get out of that is to say, no, this is because they saw Jesus. But then, Daniel, see, it's still immoral because you disappearing from this earth and leaving your loved ones behind for Christ, and then you're still going to be rejoicing and singing, and now you're married to him. But look, your wife and your kids are now in the Antichrist and the Battle of Armageddon. There's still an immoral sense of this salvation notion. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of
Oh, yeah,
like,
it's completely disconnected from the real world we live in, which a lot of theology is when you actually start to pick it apart. You know, that we mentioned this previously, I think actually when I was talking to you, and I made the comment that, you know, I've been doing a kind of a deep dive into heaven theology and hell theology and epistemology and what people really think about this stuff. And it's so fascinating to me that when I talk to Christians and I go to this men's dinner at a local church, I really enjoy the social aspect of it and communing with just men, you know, because there's a real dynamic when you take the women out of the picture. No, this is no disrespect to women or men, frankly, but there's a dynamic that happens. It's been well studied in psychology where you introduce the opposite sex into the environment, it changes the environment drastically. You know, this is just, there's a lot of chemicals that fire off in the body and stuff. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But when you just have men and you just have women getting together with themselves, you can really grow, in my opinion, as a man and in your community. And there's just a lot of benefits to it, even if it happens at a church so I go to this men's dinner every now and again. And I have a chance, I'm surrounded by hundreds of Christians, and I get a chance to talk to a lot of people about this. And I've started asking them, so what do you think is going to be like in heaven? You know, and these guys, well, they'll say things like, oh, I'll be up there playing golf, or I get to
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
dog, or I get to see my
Right.
grandma or something like that. But when I start asking them these tough questions, like, well, what about your grandma or your son or your best friend who wasn't a Christian? Are you going to think about that when you're up there? Are you going to,
Yeah.
you know, and that's just a conversation ender. Their brain cannot grasp the whole idea of what that actually is going to be like because they
Right.
know there's no good answer for that. You know what I mean? They know there's
Right.
no good
And
response to it.
the only answer is like, well, you're going to be like an angelic being. You're going to be like in this state of sublimity and ecstasy, and it's going to pale in comparison. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not, so normative morals and human ethics can't apply to like you when you're immortal and you're up in
Oh,
heaven. It's
that's what
like
they'll
beyond
say.
this world.
That's what they might
Right.
say. Some people might say, but it's
You see,
completely detached. When you
that's
start
the
talking about
only
their
way to.
son, your dead
Yeah.
son or your dead
Yeah.
daughter, you're just going to be in such ecstasy. You're not there's, you know what I mean? And yeah, they
Right. I
might say
know.
it, but they
I know.
don't. You
Right.
can see their eyes
I know.
they don't believe that that's possible because it's
I
such
know.
a
I know.
terrible thing to say. I mean, my father was murdered when I was a kid. Could you imagine how terrible
Oh,
it
it's
would be for me
terrible.
to believe that I'm going to be living in heaven and, you know, my father, who was not a Christian, is going to be not there, and I'm just suddenly going to stop missing him. I'm a 50-year-old man. I miss him every day. It happened when I was 12. You know, I still miss him every single day. You know, he never
Oh
got a chance
God,
to
I'm
meet my
sorry,
wife.
man.
Oh, no, I'm not trying to bring the conversation down. It's not like, I'm just saying
No,
that
no, no.
in my own experiences of having lost, and every one of us has lost a family member or someone we care about, you know, especially as we're adults. So it's not just, I'm not the only one going through this, but we've all experienced this. And it would, to me, it is so unthinkable and disrespectful and immoral to think that I would go up to a life in eternity of complete bliss and I would never regret that I never got a chance to see, you know what I mean? My father again is this to me is so frankly disgusting and despicable because I don't think that Christians even really think that if they had a family member or a partner or a spouse or somebody that was best friend that they knew for a fact wasn't a believer, that they really think in their heart that they're going to go up to heaven and not miss that person, not be regretful that everybody isn't there. You know what I mean? I just don't think that they might say it, but I don't think that they really believe that because that's just so detached from
Yeah.
humanity at that point.
And you know what? It'd be sad if they actually did believe that, you know? Like, wouldn't it be so sad? Like, they actually were convinced that that wouldn't even come. I mean, you know,
Oh, that
what can
is
I say,
horrible.
man? Yeah, man. I mean, I've, we've all been there. And I really am sorry to hear about, your father being murdered. I mean, that's terrible news. I can't imagine the questions that you've had just growing up, like God, why or what's the purpose? I can't imagine what you went through. Um, but
Yeah, if
I
you ever
think,
want to, not this conversation, but at some point, maybe what I'll do is, so I actually was pretty pissed off as a child about this whole thing. You know, my mother was super religious, my father wasn't. And I never understood the whole religious thing. But, you know, I was really, when that happened, I decided I was going to ask God. I was going to find this God and I was going to ask him what the fuck, you know? And so I went looking. And when I couldn't find God, I went looking for the devil to see if somebody would answer me. And I got some crazy stories that'll just spin your head off right off your shoulders to tell you. True stories. I mean, I have no reason to impress anybody with a bunch of crazy lies, but I have seen some shit that I still don't have an explanation for. I'm telling you that right now.
wow, some supernatural events.
I don't like to use the word supernatural because I do believe that there's ultimately going to be a scientific explanation for things that
Yeah,
we would
yeah,
consider to be
I
transcendental.
believe ESP. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
extrasensory
So
perception. Yeah.
exactly, but there's definitely something that's going on out there that I have personally experienced that I could tell you some. I'll tell you one crazy story. Let me tell you one crazy story here, just real quick. So, I used to work as a bouncer. I used to work in the adult industry, right? I started as a bouncer at strip clubs, and I did other things in the adult industry that we don't need to get into. But when I was working as a bouncer, I remember one night, it was a Friday night, and it was just packed house. And I used to work in a part of town called Felony Flats, very violent, very dangerous strip club. A lot of bad stuff happening there. And I never did any drugs or drank or did anything before a shift because as a trained fighter, I knew that I needed to have all my senses about me, right? If I had any chance, because I getting into a fight in the club, which is another thing I tried really hard to avoid, is so I carded everybody at the door, even the bikers and everybody else. I got some funny stories about that too, but I figured if I was going to have a fight with somebody, it was going to be outside before we got inside and they could have buddies jump on me from different angles and stuff like that, right? So inside the bar was very dangerous because people could come out of nowhere, right? So I'm there inside the bar. It's Friday night. The music's blaring. Tits and ass everywhere. People doing lines on the bar and all kinds of crazy stuff. All the bikers in there, and I had to take a piss, just a monster piss, right? And so I run into the bathroom really quick, take my piss, and I got to take it so bad. So I whip it out, and I'm practically pissing on my way through the door, right? So I'm at the urinal taking this monster piss, and I realize that I never heard the door squeak closed because that's how in tune with my environment that I was, just training in self-defense, that door always closes and it makes this really loud squeak. You can hear it over the music even, right? So I look over to see if somebody had followed me into this fairly small bathroom, why that door didn't close because I didn't see anyone behind me. And there's this fist flying through the air, right? Like literally, like nothing I could do. I got both hands on my pickle. I'm completely defenseless, right? And this
Oh
fist
wow.
stops like two. No, I'm not making this up. This fist stops like 2 centimeters in front of my nose and starts shaking. And this guy starts screaming, "What are you doing to me, man? What are you doing to me? Let go of me!" And I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? And at this point, you know how it is when you're a guy and you got to take a monster piss. You're not just going to stop. You're either going to piss all over yourself, you know what I mean, or you're going to just finish your piss. So I finished my piss. I tuck everything in, and I step back from the situation. The guy's fist is still stuck there, and I look, and the guy is completely frozen, and he is white as a ghost. His eyes are as big as teacups, and he is freaked out, and he is screaming at this point, let me go, man! What are you doing to me?"
Oh
And I'm not
wow.
touching him. And I look down, and I'm not shitting you, brother. His feet are about 3 inches off the ground, both of them. I'm starting to get kind of freaked out myself. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? So I walk around him, I wash my hands, and the whole time he's just screaming, "Let me go, man, let me go." Now, I'm the sort of person that, a lot of people in that situation would have started pounding him. You know what I mean? Like, just for the sake of him coming in there trying to jump me in the bathroom. But I'm not a violent person. I mean, I will defend myself, but I've never started a fight. So this guy's obviously not a threat to me. So I just like, what? I don't know what's going on here. So I walk out, and I'm literally like, my mind is blown. I have no idea what I'm witnessing right now, right? And I still got a shift to finish. And I'm trying to keep my head on my shoulders on what's going on here. So I walk out and there's nobody else in the bathroom, just the two of us, right? So about a minute after I walk out, this guy comes out of the bathroom. He goes back to the bar where he's got his drink. He's got a full, like a double, maybe triple shot of some kind of bourbon or what scotch or something like that sitting at the bar. I can tell by the way he's dressed. That drink probably cost $20. And I can tell by the way he's dressed, $20 is a lot of money to this guy, right? He sat in front of that drink without touching it for about 10 minutes. And so I'm like, I got to figure out what's going on here. Is that some kind of magic trick this guy pulled just to mess with me or what? So I go walk over to him and I go, "Hey, brother, what's up?" That's all I said to him. I didn't threaten him or anything like that. I just went over, "Hey, brother, what's up?" And he looked at me and he got up and he literally ran out of the club, took off running, bro. Crazy. I mean, I got crazier stories than that to tell too, but yeah. So there's some stuff
Wow,
going on out there.
man.
Yeah, it's a true
I,
story, brother. I've
wow,
never said that to
wow.
anybody. I've told a few friends, but I've certainly never said that online. People are going to think
Hey
I'm
man,
absolutely
I mean,
insane.
I don't, man, I believe it, man. I've heard a lot of stories like that too, credible stories. Even from like police officers and stuff, people that are
Oh yeah,
working in the jails. They've seen this type of what they would call demonic activity. Some could just simply say, "Oh, those are just aliens. They're extra, terrestrial beings, and they're just messing with us." And there's just some sort of like religious dogma, like the demon type stuff. Who knows? You know what I mean? But I think that that's a very interesting story because being an agnostic, you give room for that. You know what I mean? I'd be interesting
yeah.
if an atheist believes in these type of things. I'm not sure if an atheist can believe. Maybe they can. maybe it is possible to be an atheist and still believe in like these type of, beings, like transcendent agents out there. It doesn't
Well,
have to be a
I
god, right?
still say that the whole transcendental thing, like the mind or the soul. I'm not sure about these kind of transcendental concepts, but when it
Yeah.
comes to something transcendental, we actually have in physics, we have things like quarks and whips and things that just pop in and out of existence, or things that can
Yeah.
pass through solid matter. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
this is not a physical impossibility. So
Yeah. I get it.
I
I get it.
believe, yeah, I believe that with science, with advancements in science, we may find a natural explanation for what we
Yeah.
deem supernatural, which is
Yeah.
why I don't, something is supernatural, we can actually know it. But if we can find a natural explanation for it, well, then it's no longer supernatural by
Right.
definition.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
it's just
and I think
our
that with science,
technology. Right.
yeah, I think our
Yeah.
technology is moving there. I don't know if it happened in my lifetime, but you even think about string theory, and I
Hmm.
think they came up with like 11 different dimensions, and so there's just so many things in physics that we're starting to tap into that provide a very reasonable explanation. It's not the full story yet, but we can
Right.
look into things, because all I can do is I can look at my own experiences, like that, for example. And I've got some other things. Like I said, we could spend an hour just talking about some of the crazy shit that I've seen, messing with Ouija boards, all kinds of crazy stuff that, that it's just insane. Um, yeah, I don't want to get into it. There's too much to, we spend a whole nother stream talking about that. But if you're ever interested in getting into some of the supernatural stuff, or quote unquote supernatural stuff, and your audience wants
Let's
to hear
do it,
about,
man. Let's do it. Hey, man,
yeah,
I'm so down. That's one of my favorite things to do is watch scary movies, man. That's my favorite genre. I love to hear all the horror stories. I don't know if you know the YouTube channel called Slapped Ham.
no,
Yeah, it's called Slapped Ham. There's like millions of subscribers. Like he does like all the paranormal things caught on camera, all the stories. Like his whole YouTube channel is dedicated. I love hearing about this stuff. Like, it's interesting, and I do believe that there could be a scientific explanation for this. I remember there was this one court case where, and this was a real court case. It was actually on like Cold Case Files, or one of them, whatever, one of these major television broadcasting stations. They had a psychic one time identify like a piece of clothing or an object that was so crucial to finding who the murderer was. And if it wasn't for that psychic, and it was very rare why, the state, I forgot what state it was, but the state would allow a psychic and what they say
yeah,
have anything to do in a judiciary court hearing, right? But her information was so spot on that they were actually able to go and find that piece. It was like out in the forest. She says, I don't know, it was like a piece of clothing or an object. She goes, I see it out in the forest, out in this area. And boom, the cops found it. And so
dang.
there was no denying it. That's why he hit Cold Case Files. It was like, whoa, this was so unusual but it was so accurate. And if it wasn't for her saying that, and no, she wasn't linked to the murder, if it wasn't for her saying that, then yeah, then that's it.
Well, I don't
Then
usually watch. I'm fascinated by it because of my own personal experiences. I don't normally watch stuff like that because it's very likely that that stuff gets sensationalized. Not to say there aren't true stories mixed in there, but there's a huge market for just coming up with a ghost or Bigfoot or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, there's
So
that
there's
too.
just
There's that too.
that's
But
that's why what
I've
I
always
do
thought,
watch.
yeah,
Well, what I do watch though, and I had to actually stop because it was starting to really depressed me. It was just how sick and how depraved the human mind can be. But I was watching true stories about murderers and stuff, and actually like actual interviews inside interrogation rooms and stuff that's not
yeah,
put out by just people, but it's actually like court cases and stuff you're talking about. But it's all
yeah,
stuff that's been verified. It's legal. These people get convicted and they go to prison and stuff. And you're actually watching their interrogations, and you're seeing the actual evidence, and
yeah,
it's shocking how many people that have what gets ultimately defined as like a personality disorder, schizophrenia, or antisocial disorder and stuff. But when you watch these people, they make claims about demon possession. They literally are talking to themselves when the detectives aren't in the room, or sometimes they're talking to somebody that's in the room that nobody can see. And this is happening on a police camera. This is not just something that somebody filmed on you know what I mean? Like, this is in a
yeah,
controlled environment, and these people are not just actors. There's no way these people are paid actors, because they have the court documents, the convictions, all that stuff on there because this is real life crime we're talking about, and it's really interesting and depressing, but it is interesting to see how many of these, because you think, what would it take for a human being, for a mother to end the lives of her own children? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like this happens in real life,
yeah,
and what does it take when you actually tap into the minds of these people and you watch the interviews and stuff? Holy
yeah.
crap, dude. It's really crazy.
Yeah, man. There's a lot that we don't know, and I think one of the major philosophical discussions is the concept of information. I think, like, is information the basis of everything? Information, whether it's metaphysical, transcendent, and that's what some people in their brains, they could pick up the supernatural, or they can detect something that is metaphysical, but it's still tied to the physics in some sense. It's still tied to it. You know what I mean? And I think that's very interesting, but some people look at that, Daniel, and say, look, that's proof that religion is real. That's proof that God is real, and that's just not enough to prove that this particular
No,
dogma.
no,
Right,
no,
right.
it's not.
So,
I agree with you 100% that it does offer credence to certain claims, but it's not proof either because a lot of this stuff is conjecture. You're listening to me tell a story, but as soon as you go tell somebody else my story, it's conjecture. And I could be
yeah,
a total liar. You know what I mean? Like I could just be
right,
making up a great story. I give you my
right,
word as a gentleman and a brother that I'm not. I have no
right,
motivation to because I'm an agnostic. So why would I make up a stupid story like that? You know what I mean? But
right.
people can, that's the problem with it, is that really evidence? No, I didn't take any pictures. I didn't, you know what I mean? Like we didn't have smartphones for one thing back then. It wasn't, but whatever. There is an interesting element to it, but like you said so astutely, and you're absolutely right. Like oftentimes when you speak, you're very intelligent, Tristan. I commend you
Oh,
for
thank you,
that.
man. Likewise.
It it doesn't point to any particular direction of any anthropomorphized God or any organized religion or any of the claims that are being made about global floods or Adam and Eve or fruit getting stuck in somebody's Adam. None of that stuff is
Yeah,
is being, you know what I mean? Like you're not providing any substance to any of those claims just by saying that something inexplicable has happened. And
right.
because one inexplicable thing has happened, then you just got to accept every inexplicable thing without evidence. That's just not the way it works.
Yeah, I hear you 100%, man. And what can I say? I mean, I think that our job is, to enlighten humanity, those who want to be enlightened. Thank you for your kind words. I look at you as a wealth of knowledge as well, and I feel like you and I, we're on that same mission. Every day, I want to be the best version of myself and help others be the best version of themselves. And I feel like you and I, we have that mindset of, look, I'm not trying to, hurt nobody, ruin their faith, or go out wanting to deconvert. I'm not knocking on doors wanting to deconvert people. But what can I say? When you're at this level, these details matter, and these, it takes years, bro, to get here. It takes years, and most Christians haven't even read the Bible from front to cover. So, it's like, what can I say? But it's not in vain. I do feel like the same, morals and virtues that, I'll speak for myself as a former Christian, I still have. I'm not a drastically different person. And so I just feel like, good people are going to be good people apart from religion. And what can I say? These topics are important. And when it comes to the transcendent world, Daniel, we don't know. And hopefully one day we will know. And hopefully it'll, help better our existence if we can know more about the metaphysical world or the transcendent world. Maybe we can find something that will help, benefit, the human race. But yeah, man, I'd absolutely love to do another podcast with you. If you want to talk about some of these stories, it'd be pretty cool. I think it'd be, different and interesting. We could even, promote it and entitle it. Like, I don't know what we will title it, but whatever you feel, it would be great. And you can share some of these, paranormal, events that took place. Yeah, I'd actually would love to hear about it.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that if I really want to put myself out there like that, because that does
Okay,
really put a big target on my back. It's interesting to talk about, but I do need to think about that. What am I really
cool.
doing to myself for the future? Because I don't want to look like I'm giving any credence to things that I'm trying to reject, like
I get
particular
it. I get
theologies
it.
and stuff.
No, no,
But
I
one
get
thing
it. I get
just
it.
in closing, I think I would say is that when you mentioned the, that are we going to come to one world? government or one religion, or if we get
Yeah.
rid of religion and stuff like that, what's going to happen? And that's something I thought of, but I didn't mention is what I see so far, and I see this throughout history, and I don't necessarily see it changing, is that there's a pendulum that's swinging, right? And it swings back and it swings forth, and it goes from one extreme to another extreme, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down, in my opinion,
Mm.
and just from a basic observation. And so I don't know if it ever will come to a rest in the middle. Now, gravity tells us that eventually it's got to, right? But the laws of physics say that, the law of motion, right? Whatever's at rest wants to stay at rest. Whatever's in motion wants to stay in motion. So it depends on if there's another um, effect that's going, to alter its state, right? So if we
Yeah.
have something like gravity, then it will slow it down. So if humanitarianism and secularism and the natural law of morality is essentially that gravity that weighs
Yeah.
down on this pendulum, then it will come to a rest. But if there's
Mm.
nothing there, it won't stop swinging. It's got to be affected by something else. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, it's just going to keep swinging. There's no reason for it to
Wow.
stop.
Wow. That's really good. That's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah, I believe it was Arthur Schopenhauer. He talked about the will of the human being metaphysical. And that whole concept of will, like the will to live, the will to push forward. You could even see that in animals. Like, what is it that will, right? And there's just so many mysteries, man. But I like what you just brought up right now. It just made me think of that. Very, very insightful. Well, man, dude, what can I say? I think we need to have, another podcast. Let me know if there's anybody that you've seen on my channel or anybody that you may know. We could have more group discussions, man, because people are going to hear what you have to say. People are going to hear what we have to say, and we can benefit them. So, dude, I just want to say thank you, man, just for being a wealth of knowledge, and for being experienced. And what can I say, man? Like you're up there, bro. I really feel that you could, speak on a world class level with anybody on the face of this earth. I really do believe that you have that substance within you. So I'm delighted, man, to have you on my podcast again. If there's anybody, like I said, that you wish to speak to, that may have appeared on my podcast, or anybody that you know personally, dude, let's bring them on board, man. Let's have fun with this, and I'm more than willing, man, to engage with you more. I've learned a lot today, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from what you have to say. So that's my closing, bro. And any words, final words?
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for opening your house up to me. I've been a guest here, and
Of
you're
course, man.
the consummate host. Absolutely, you're very polite. You're very well spoken, and as I mentioned before, I've been very impressed with you. You're a bit younger than I am, and I'm so when I see people like yourself out in the world, it gives me hope for the future of humanity. That's what you represent to me, and I think you
Thank you,
represent that
man.
to a lot of people. To be honest with you,
Thank you,
you're
man.
very
That's what I want to do.
intelligent,
Thank
but
you.
you also are in touch with your humanity. And I've heard you speak passionately about things that I believe in, such as the well being of children and so many other things. And I just think that the world is a better place because you're in it. And I don't mind telling you that to your face, so to speak, right
Oh,
now. And
thank
I'm
you,
telling you right
man.
now, brother, if you and I were together, I would be an honor for me to take you out for a good glass of scotch,
Oh,
sit on the
damn,
back
man.
patio and catch the breeze and just shoot the shit. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely, fam.
I'm
Now
down,
there is a guy
man.
who's been trolling me. He's one of the guys that was one of those Christians that was attacking me about the global flood, and he's a huge proponent of the hydroplate theory. And I don't know if you even know what that is. It's so ridiculous. I encourage you, if you want a good laugh, to look into the hydroplate theory. And I would love to even talk, even if he doesn't want to debate me, because I invited him to. He's been trolling around trying
Who
to
is it?
attack
Did he
me in
appear on the comment section?
he appeared in the actually in that post debate conversation we had after my
Oh, okay.
debate. He actually came into that, and his name is Dirty Varmint, and he
Oh, okay.
literally he's just a troll, but he's trying to push this hydroplate theory, and he thinks that the only way that you can get sediment fossils is with a global flood, and that you can only get round rocks from a global all this insanity. And I said, listen, bro, I've already given you the information, and I've already, cited the sources and stuff. And you call it these scientists God fearers, and so let's just have a public debate, and we'll just get the
Yeah.
information out there where people could do it. So that's if he wants to do that, I would be happy to do it with him. And I don't know if he wants to go into A's philosophy channel because that's kind of his buddy, or if A's philosophy doesn't want to have because he's a Christian, and I feel kind of bad for shooting down things like the flood so vehemently because he's got a lot of Christian viewers, and I don't want to piss off his audience, because I'm taking off the gloves when I talk about stuff like that. I do not like to see the misinformation. I think that's harmful to children, to tell them that the earth is only 6,000 years old and there was a global flood, and the whole, because the whole story behind it comes down to the Xing of babies, and I'm just not into it. You got to take the whole thing. You can't, if I could throw a pen out there, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You got to take it all.
I like
but
that.
anyway,
Yeah.
but anyway, let me get out of your hair, family. I know it's been a long day for you, and I just want to say
No, bro, no,
thank you
man.
for having me.
Dude, thank you, bro. And it's a delight having you on here. Sometimes I have, people come on the podcast and it's like, man, I want somebody that's gonna, teach me a thing or two. I'm always wanting to learn, so dude, that mutual respect, man, it goes vice versa. So I'm so glad that, I met a brother in humanity. And hey, man, don't tempt me because, we might just meet up one day, go grab, a beer or something like that and go and chill. So, you know what I
Well,
mean?
we're both on the west. Hey, we're both on the West Coast. Now, I don't make it down to
That's
San
true.
Diego anymore. I used to live in San Diego. I don't make it down there anymore, and it breaks my heart to go down there because it's so different from how it was when I used to live down there. I was going to college and stuff.
Oh,
I mean, homeless population, and then you've got
it's
the
all over.
insanity with politics down there. It
Yeah.
just breaks my heart. It used to be so beautiful. I used to surf like Garfield Beach and all the joints, bro. I know all the spots down there.
Man, I
But
want to know, man. I
you're
want to
gonna
hear
have
the
to come.
story, man. You're a bouncer in a club, bro. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, I wouldn't glorify it. I mean, those are my sisters, and the customers were my brothers. I'll be honest with you. Some of my
Okay.
best friends come from that industry. I worked in the adult industry for 4 years, and I could really talk about the dangers of that. Because I'll never step foot in a strip club. And I used to work in the adult industry for 4 years. I started as a bouncer, then I got tired of knocking heads, and so I became a bartender, and then ended up working in the escort business. I mean, yeah, I know the adult industry very well, and it's
Man,
not
that's
something I'm
funny.
proud of. Yeah, but I am
Yeah.
proud of the fact that I met a lot of good sisters and a lot of good brothers. They get a bad rap, and it's really sad because there's a lot of sad stuff that happens in the adult industry, and there's no getting around that. But at the end of the day, these are human beings that are
Yeah.
broken. Most of them are just totally broken. That's why they're there. And
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So there's just, I could really talk about some of that stuff. All I can say is I'm glad I've met a beautiful woman. I've got a good wife, and I'm a family
Nice,
man.
man.
And
Oh, man,
I
I'm
don't do the
happy for you,
drugs and
bro.
stuff anymore. I got
Oh,
rid of
man,
all
I'm
that.
happy for you. I'm happy for you, man. Maybe one day I'll get there. I got maybe about another 10 more years before I don't know. I want to fall in love. I want to have what you have, one day. But it has to be the right one, I guess. So I'm happy for you, man. You're such a cool dude. We got Lance in the house. He says, Cali bros, love it. Yeah, that's what it is. Let's see, anybody else here
Well,
in
you
the
guys
chat?
come up north. You guys come up north anytime, man. Drinks are on me. There's no doubt about that.
What part do you live in? What area?
I'm out
Up
of
north?
Portland. Yeah, I'm out of Portland, Oregon.
Dude, I used to work. I used to live in Portland. I used to work for a pastor up in there.
It's and I can't say that Portland is not turned into a shit show either. I swear, man. This is like the
Yeah,
armpit of
this was
America,
in
right?
2013, man. I lived in Portland for like almost a year, man. It was raining all the time. It was fun. You know what I mean? It's a
It used to be
beautiful.
such a beautiful city, man. I'm telling you, it used to be so nice and so diverse, and it was just the mantra around here used to be keep Portland weird, because we were just like loving
Yeah,
everybody,
yeah,
and stuff. But
yeah.
it's not like that anymore, bro. It's very just like
Really?
California. It's very divisive, and yeah, it's really sad.
Oh man. Dude, I remember it was tight. Like, I remember the beavers and the ducks. They always
Yeah,
go back and
yeah.
forth. That was something I remember all the time. Um, oh, it
The
looks like
Civil War, the true Civil War,
yeah,
baby.
that's the true Civil War. And I just remember in every like 5 blocks or something like that, there was a strip club and a church. Like, you see churches and strip
Yep.
clubs everywhere. Yeah, I had the fried Oreo. There was like this iconic place for donuts and stuff out in Portland. Like a lot of tourists go there. I had a fried Oreo. But I just remember, dude, because I was a Christian at that time, and you know, I now that I'm no longer a believer, like the whole world changes. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's I used to believe stuff like, oh, this is all like demonically influenced, all this stuff, but it's not. This is just these are human beings. This is a product of human anthropology, and the world just it shifts, and but that's unfortunate to hear that Portland's not the same. It was beautiful, man, especially when the sun was shining. I mean, just like the
Oh, yeah.
scenery and everything. But yeah,
Oh, it
I'm
is,
sure
and
the
it still
scenery.
is. I mean, that's one thing about
Yeah.
this global warming thing that's happening. I know a lot of people deny global warming, and I'm not going to push politics, but if you deny global warming, you're just not paying attention to what goes on, you know. And with global warming, the average temperatures around here are actually getting so much nicer. You know,
Really
it's
now?
a little drier, a little warmer. So eventually, this is going to be like the new San Diego, believe it or not, at some point. You know, maybe
Wow.
100, 200 years from now. Yeah, it will be like the, to that
Wow.
point. I swear, it's going to be very close to it. I mean, we have some different
Wow.
issues because of the Cascade Mountain Range. You know how it runs through, and it obviously affects things. But yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm a huge river guy. That kayak that you see me riding, that's on the
Yeah.
Clackamas. I believe that's one's Clackamas, might be the Willamette. When I invented my boat years ago, 2013, I think I brought it to market. I actually did a trip down 101, and I stopped all along at all the beach spots, all the way down to my old hometown in San Diego, and promoted the boat. And then I went over to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, to do a promotion. I've got a bunch of videos. I took them all off of my channel because I sold the business and the patents, and I don't want those videos on my channel because people look at it and they want to buy boats, and I'm not selling boats
Oh,
anymore. And then they want my life story about why did I sell the idea and why don't I build boats? Blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get into it. People get so old. But yeah, I've got some crazy videos from my pool at the house I had down in San Diego of me testing my boat for the first time. I've got videos of a bunch of girls playing around on the boat over in Arizona and stuff like that. Yeah, those are my old stomping
nice.
grounds, bro, for sure.
Nice, man. Nice. Well, man, what can I say? It's dude, you're one of the best guests I've had on my, my podcast, and dude, I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. And again, if you have any ideas, any thoughts, and you like to utilize the podcast for anything, you just let me know, and I will be here and open it up for you. And that goes for anybody that's listening in the chat. Shoot me an email. I'm reachable. Just shoot me an email, and if you would like certain people to come on that just let me know what's up, and we'll make it happen. So Daniel, thank you so very much, man. I've learned a few things today, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. And if there's anybody that you like to debate or have an open live discussion, and if you like it on my channel, man, this is your home. So by all means, man, utilize it and just stay in touch with me, man. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from you.
All right, family, be good or be good at it.
Thank you, man. We'll do. Thank you, bro. Much love, everyone. Thank you for your attention. We are signing off in 3, 2, and 1.